I'm just very aware that like the term breathwork for some people creates an image, and it's just actually one dimension of it.
Hello, wonderful humans. Welcome back to the podcast. Appreciate you being here. Just do one quick thing for me and hit the subscribe button and then a like if you find this episode valuable. So I've got David Jackson on the podcast talking all about breathing. Now, we all do it. We all know what it is. It makes up our experience in life. However, some do it more effectively than others. And this is what the conversation is about. We talk all about why mouth breathing perhaps is a very inefficient way to go about our day and exercise, and how we can almost transition back to a more natural way of breathing, which is through the nose. I feel like this conversation is a way into living a more healthier life and looking to gain more awareness into something that affects everything, and we can improve just by bringing our awareness to it. So Jacko is, of course, on a big mission to educate people on breathing and get people to understand more about the most effective ways of breathing. He's a master oxygen advantage coach, also co-founder of the School of Calisthenics, and he has a wealth of information online, lots of content, so please check out the links below. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Please communicate with us in the comments, and I will answer any questions you've got for me or Jacko. Appreciate your time. Hit that subscribe button, and I will speak to you soon. Enjoy the podcast.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like what we have been through, I guess, shapes where we are now, and what I've learned over the last 10 years or more is that it's exciting to actually then not know where you're going. So I don't have like an amazing master plan to be able to share and talk to you about of like where things are going, because ultimately like we don't know. And when I look back on my own history, and I think people will be able to relate to this, I look back on my own history 10 years ago, I was playing rugby. My career was about to come to an end because of a head injury. I'd had a series of head injuries through my career. This is the final one was in 2013. So, 9 years ago, I retired because of a brain injury, had a seizure on the training field, and a small bleed on the brain that then meant I had to retire. I went through quite a difficult period of life where you just, if anyone's had even just like a small concussion can really like, make you feel sick and unwell and dazed for like a day and not sort of yourself, and thinking and cognition can be a little bit challenged because, your brain's been shook up a little bit. I'd experienced that when I was like 16 for the first time, and then after my 10th so head injury or whatever, however many it had been, where it's progressively getting worse. It was months on end feeling like you just can't function. Day to day we just take it for granted, all the millions of things that your brain does for you just to sort of like be here, let alone do anything cool. And then when your brain is basically needing some time out to recover and has to sort of shut off a load of things, you're like left with like not being able to do much, which is pretty challenging. And also not knowing like when will this be, when will I recover, and when will this come back to normal. And a lot of people can relate to that from when COVID set in, and when we've been restricted in our day-to-day living for months on end, it was like, when is this ever going to get back to normal? And we're hopeful that it will get back to normal, but then it's like we don't know when, and that like in between of not knowing can be difficult. So if I go back 10 years, I think like, well, there's no way I thought I'd be doing what I'm doing now. So what am I going to be doing in 10 years time? It would be history would show that it'd be silly for me to think that I know what I'm going to do in 10 years time. But I've enjoyed and learned a lot over the years. After rugby initially, like you mentioned about School of Calisthenics, I went into personal training and strength and conditioning. Before School of Calisthenics, we're working with Tim, who we both started School Calisthenics, and we still run the School Calisthenics together. It's not something that we're not involved in. We still run that together. It's us that do that. We were working with Paralympic athletes that helped build an understanding from a sort of like training science perspective, like how the human body works in sort of quite potentially complex scenarios, where training someone that hasn't got all of their physical capabilities, whatever their impairment is, like means you have to be able to think outside the box. And if you don't understand actually what's going on with the training, then it's difficult to be able to change and adapt things. For me, during this whole process, it's always felt like the handbrake's been slightly on. I was looking at come across some research to do with, when you've had something like a brain injury, you tend to, and it affects you quite badly for a long time. It was about a year till I felt like I was fully over my symptoms and be able to run without getting headaches and that sort of thing. So it wasn't, that was like 2014. And we started the School Calisthenics in 2016. But yeah, looking at some research around like brain injuries and how that affect breathing patterns. And I did a couple of the tests from the Oxygen Advantage about like whether you good levels of like carbon dioxide tolerance or whether you've got dysfunctional breathing patterns. And I scored like as a severe asthmatic, or potentially like that sort of in that level. And I was like, I've never had asthma or any trouble with my breathing to my knowledge. And it was like all this, and I'd never done any of these tests. I never got taught anything about breathing when I was playing professional rugby. So I don't actually know whether it was the head injury that caused some of this, but the sort of like fitness levels I was at when I was playing rugby, like I must have been breathing reasonably well. I think otherwise it'd have been difficult to do that work. But yeah, that sort of led me down a path to go, okay, if I have had a serious brain injury and breathing is the respiratory center that's in the brainstem, makes sense that might need a little bit of help and work. And what can this be? And breathing being something that goes on in the background constantly, that could affect so many other autonomic functions within the body, and wanting to be as healthy as I could be and try to, what things, because often when you have something like a head injury, there's the rehabilitation process is like, just don't do anything. Like there was no, at that time, there's no like rehab program or advice or help or anything. It was just wait and rest. Whereas knowing that there's actually actively something that you can do that will help with blood flow, oxygen supply to the brain, well, that's going to help you recover to a better degree, as well as the impact that poor breathing can have on all other aspects of your like health, wellness, and stress levels and nervous system. So I started getting very initially challenged by that, but then very excited by that. I did the Oxygen Advantage teacher training only because I wanted to understand it better myself. I wasn't actually thinking, I didn't do it on the purpose of wanting to then be a breath coach or teach it. But you have to do 3 case studies as well as your exam to become certified. And I think I saw better results with people on my case studies than I even had with myself. and I've been trying stuff on myself for a long time. And really enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed like working with people and just coaching and helping people. And I think that's something, and that was the same with like, it's the same thing with movement and calisthenics and training, like helping people to enjoy moving their bodies and things. I think that something that's captured my passion and excitement around breathing is like that breathing's for everyone, whereas calisthenics can't be for everyone because some of it's just too hard. Like some of it's hard. Like some serious stuff when you talk about human flags and things like that. Whereas breathing is for everyone, and the simplicity of breathing and the accessibility of breathing is something that I know that there was barriers and misconceptions for myself around, like, what is breath work and is it this? And I don't know if I can sit down and meditate. So and like, you know, there was all these things that made it feel like not a normal thing that should be part of my everyday life. And that's where you said that phrase that's sort of on my bio on my Instagram, like making breathwork normal. It doesn't have to be this thing where we sit down on our yoga mat, put our bandana on and sit cross-legged and put the hands like this and hum. Like, even though I'm down with all that and that's cool, and like I'll be more, I can enjoy and experience that thing now. And if you look at, I'll be wearing a bandana in some. I've got a huge selection of bandanas, but it's not essential. It's not an essential part of it. And the most important thing is like, how are you breathing day to day when you're not paying attention to your breathing, when you're asleep, when you are exercising, and when you like just all 24/7, because your brain and the receptors in your brain that modulate your breathing, they're constantly listening, monitoring, and working with you. And that's what's going to affect it the most, rather than just a 20-minute practice that you do 3 times a week. It's not the same as like a strength training program. It's not the same as like, you know, do this on one day and then do this on another day. No, it's something that you're doing all the time. It's something that's automatic. Just because it's automatic doesn't mean it's optimal. And so there are things that you can do to just improve them. And my, and I'll shut up in a second, my take on it was like, if you're doing that, like if every breath is a movement, like your ribs move, your diaphragm space, like this, you can move well or you can move badly. The same like a squat or a push-up. You can do a squat well, you can do a squat badly. The best squat you ever did was probably when you were a baby and no one taught you how to do that. Again, interestingly, almost like you'd argue that it's automatic and we've become dysfunctional in it. But you do potentially about 20 to 24,000 breaths per day. So it's average. That's a lot of reps. And for me, it was a case of, well, if I could just do each, well, one, it was like, firstly, are you doing it well? Like physically, mechanically, like, and I couldn't answer that question. I didn't even know how to answer that question. So that's where I started exploring that. And the excitement for me was around, we do that many every day. If you can just make each one or just a few of them like a little tiniest bit better, how much difference, because the sheer number of them, that will then have on how you feel, how you move, how you think, how you perform, how your nervous system is, and you know, that influence on is so linked to virtually everything that's going on in your body. That is something that I just couldn't not pay attention to. And then, you know, the differences it's made for me and the differences it makes with people that I've had the great pleasure of working with is, and in quite different scenarios, like in sports performance, as well as working with professionals, athletes, and that, to corporate well-being, to working with people with stress and anxiety, things like it can influence so many different things. It also provides a lot of variety, which I really enjoy. And like you say, or sorry, like I said earlier on, can genuinely say, this is for everyone. Even if you're already good at breathing, if you're a little bit even more efficient at breathing, then you can be even calmer and even better. And even, you know, it's something that is genuinely for everyone. I can't not get excited and passionate about sharing some things that I've been lucky enough to learn from some of the best people in the world, like Patrick McKeown, about breathing. And, you know, I feel like my little role in it is to try and make it accessible and make it normal for people that want to engage in that. And that's the invitation, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good insight into that, your journey to it, and how it's organically come about. You know, it wasn't just like, oh, that sounds good, I want to do that. It was very much like,
I didn't even want to. There was not want to teach, but just it was like, I wanted to understand it more, because like reading a couple of books got me excited. I was like, you know,
I think there's a couple of things as well, because we sometimes think, and I hear this a lot about, when I ask someone if they ever tried breath work, you know, it's the immediate is, well, it's just, I know how to breathe. And we think And there's effective ways of doing things and ineffective ways of doing things. Like I try not to lean into the good and bad and fall into those kind of categories, because that comes with so much kind of shame or, you know, judgment more than
Yeah.
anything. But there are effective and ineffective ways of doing things. And breathing's one, running's another, that we feel like you can go out for a run, but have you ever, you know, reflected on and had some awareness of your technique or how you're doing something? Generally, how you're doing something is what makes the experience, whether that's eating, something so fundamental as eating. And yes, as kids, as babies, we are somewhat of a kind of clean slate in a way. And we do things very naturally. But conditioning, environment, circumstance, everything plays in. And then we reach the age of reason, and then the further on, the age where we start to do reflect on our lives, and then we've built up all these unhealthy habits.
Mm.
Um, and breathing is such a big way into that, because it is so fundamental to what makes up us, and how we, I guess, even how we feel throughout the day. And then it kind of comes in with what comes first. You know, is it poor breathing, and then that contributes to different things, or is it the things that are contributing to
Yeah.
the breathing? And that's, I kind of guess we can talk about that a little bit. The chicken or the egg. I sometimes feel like we want to find
Yeah.
out what came first, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because everything affects everything else. And I guess that's that real
Yeah.
decompartmentalizing, trying to like break it up to study it, but it's all encompassing, like the body and the emotions. So yeah, I think for people listening that I guess want to know more about, I'll tell you a bit about my journey to this, actually, because that might be quite useful. I remember hearing Patrick McKeown on, I think it was Aaron Alexander's podcast, in 2018.
Yeah.
And then I got his book in just before lockdown, I'm sure it was. I
Yeah.
remember it came out around then. And it was so fascinating to me. I then just started becoming more aware of my breathing, as you say, in day to
Yeah.
day. I remember painting a house and I was like checking in with my breath, which you rarely ever do. And I'm like, wow, you know, you find yourself just like just breathing out through your mouth. And I'm like, okay, let's try it differently and see
Yeah.
how that affects things. Um, and there's so many different points of the day where we can just check in with that, and I think that is the most powerful,
Yeah.
rather than teaching someone breath work or going to kind of a workshop, really trying to, I guess, get to the kind of holistic side of embedding it into your lifestyle.
Yeah.
um
But there's
but yeah.
elements, isn't there, of like almost going like, well, if you say breath work to someone, if depending on what they've experienced or what they've seen, they might only think of sort of Wim Hof breathing.
Hmm.
Um, and someone every, say, 3 times a week doing 20 minutes of hyperventilation will create an experience for them for sure. But
Hmm.
like if they need some work on their breathing mechanics, and if they need some work on their chemosensitivity, well, it's not really addressing that. And it's not, I'm not saying it's, like you were saying, like these things are not
Hmm.
good or bad. It's just understanding what they are and what it is. And I'm just very aware that like the term breathwork for some people um, creates an image, and it's just actually one dimension of it. Like you say, almost it's just like it's breathing rather than breath work. I don't know. Is it, there's the
Yeah, how
but
can you
it's
say making breath work normal then? Is that
yeah, I
something?
don't know. It's almost like it's so new in the sort of normal living
Hmm.
space that it's I sort of feel like it's still currently being defined of like what it is and the different dimensions of it. There's lots, James Nestor,
Hmm.
his book Breath, he does explore really nicely and explains like there's all these different like breathing techniques, but then there is like your um functional breathing, that talks about the importance of nasal breathing and why that's so um, important, but just um, not even necessity. It's just how we're designed to breathe.
Hmm.
Um, and so,
Yeah, and what are the contributing factors mouth breathing, which is essentially
Yeah.
something that feeds its way into the conversation quite heavily, I feel, and we all do it. Let's dive into that, really, like the mouth breathing, nasal breathing conversation, because as you said, like breathing as a child, like you will witness a child, the way they move, the way they squat, you're like, you need that micro movement for another movement. It's a precursor for something greater, walking.
Yeah.
And breathing, I don't know what that precursor is, but maybe just for
Well,
doing everything well.
yeah, but breathing is the precursor for life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're born, you take your first breath, and when you die, you take your last breath. You know, I'll mention this, but sometimes it throws me off. My dad passed away a few months ago, and you know, he was at home, and we were with him at the end, and we saw him take his last breath. And anyone that's been there experienced that type of thing, like it's pretty hard, and it's there's a lot going on. And the one of the things that you would typically say, and I remember me and my mum sort of saying it to each other, it's like, he's gone. And but because he'd stopped breathing, and he'd passed to wherever is next, or wherever we go, but his body was still there in front of us.
There's such a difference there,
So
isn't
like my body is in front of you now,
Yeah.
and I can touch my body, and like it's almost like that's me, but actually it's not, because my body will still be here for a period of time before it decays, or we take them into the cemetery or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But you is what's on the inside, and what is allowing you to be you is the breath. Because without the breath, we know very simply that then, yeah, no, we're just a vessel, we're just a body, we're dead. And that can sound a bit, I'm trying to make it, and it's only happened to me a few months ago, so I'm still trying to like formalize my brain, or sort of trying to verbalize in a way that's simple for people to grasp what I'm trying to get at. But I think we can all appreciate that, like, when someone dies, they're gone, but their physical body is in front of us. So, but we know they're gone. So therefore our physical body isn't really the thing that is us. And in order for that body to be alive, and you to be there, and to be able to experience the world through your body is the way you experience it, you need air, you need to be breathing. You know, you need other things that are really important for life. Well, you need food and you need water, but breath is a precursor of that, because if you gave someone food and water but take all the air out of them, and then they're dead. So the food and water is irrelevant at that point. So the breath is literally, the breath is life, and your life starts with one, and it ends with other. And I guess what's interesting, I think is interesting, is talking about, like, it's what goes on between those breaths, because that then makes me think of, like, well, between the first and last, well, that's then like what's going on between my whole life. But then you've got all those little breaths that you're taking on the way, and what's happening constantly in between those. And with breathing, you can simplify it down super easy. You're either breathing in, breathing out, or holding your breath. Like, there is nothing else. There are those, that's part of the cycle. There's those three things. When I'm talking, I'm breathing out. I'm not breathing in. Like, I'm not breathing out when you're trying to talk, breathing in. Like, and everything else in life happens when you're doing one of those three things. It's just that has to be the precursor for what's going on. And so if we are, and that breath, in order to have that life, stuff has got to move within your body to draw air in and then get rid of air. Typically, the simplified, like oxygen in and CO2 out, and we don't have to get bogged down in the science if you don't want to, but like, just that, make the point that CO2 is not just a waste gas you have to get rid of. It plays some very, very important roles within the body to allow the oxygen to be utilized. But how well you make that air come in and out is going to affect how hard your body is working to do that base level thing of you just needing to be alive before you do anything else in your day. And even when you're sleeping, it will dictate, like, the state of calmness that your body is in, the state that your nervous system is in, things like your blood pressure, your heart rate, all these things are linked into your breathing, your brain, and linked into your brain. And then you've got all this feedback going on when we start thinking about the nervous system and the vagus nerve that's sending information back from inside of you, your internal organs back up to the brain, rather than everything just being brain down. And one of the things that, whether I'm working with someone, say an international rugby player, or working with someone that's just struggling with like stress and anxiety from a busy job or busy life, whatever it is, like that's nothing to do with sport at all. Both of those two people, from me, if they're working with me, that I will try to encourage is the starting point is what you mentioned about that awareness. Are you aware of what your breathing is like day to day? Because your day-to-day breathing is your foundation upon which we're going to try and build improvements in everything else. Like if your base level of breathing is more efficient, you don't need to breathe as much, and you don't need to breathe as fast. That's more calming and relaxing for the system overall. And your then body has got less work to do to just be here before you take on the stresses of the day or the stresses of your exercise performance. The other thing that's really interesting when we're talking about stressful situations, whether it's physical stress from exercise or stress emotionally, is that challenge, that stress will challenge your breathing. And if you're slightly inefficient and a little bit dysfunctional at rest, but you can't really tell because at rest you're not being challenged. So I might be a bit of a chest breather, but it's very small, so I don't really notice. I'm not really that aware. I've not done that awareness piece yet that you talked about. But as soon as you get stressed, as soon as you start exercising, or as soon as something happens, you then see that stress challenging your breathing, and then you find out what your breathing is like. And that's one of the things that I've loved about getting back into running, something that when I had my brain injury, I couldn't do for a whole year. But over the last couple of years, getting back into running and using it not as an exercise to get better at running or to get fitter necessarily, it's actually been using it as an opportunity to experience my breath more deeply, because it highlights what's going on. You run and tune into your breathing. It's much easier to tune into your breathing when you're running than when you're just sat here. When you're sat doing nothing, it's actually harder. Your breathing will be it's harder to like change your breathing when you're running if you're struggling with like some dysfunctional breathing patterns, but it will certainly be louder. It will certainly be amplified. So I've really enjoyed that process of like running being an experience to connect with the breath, which then opens up lots of other avenues about connecting with yourself, your mind, your body, the world around you as you run through it, rather than it just being exercising for the sake of exercising. You combine that with the nasal breathing, and then it starts to actually become a really enjoyable experience that isn't like taxing my body so hard that it's like, oh, I feel absolutely dead at the end of this training session. It takes me days to recover before I even really want to go and do that again. It's just like adding stress on my life. It's why I've ended up getting into like ultra marathons where you have to run quite far, recover enough for the next day to run really, really far again, and then the next day really, really far again. And so you can't be doing it in a way that is just like, completely like debilitating your body, so that the next day you're really sore and you can't move because you've got to go and run another X number of miles. And so whether that transcends to anybody that's like just doing like a 1 mile or a 5K event or something, that it doesn't, if we can work on a number of different things, but when from the breath perspective, we can work on the breath as you're running, you're going to recover faster. You're not going to get as fatigued. It's going to be a more enjoyable experience. Your brain, your nervous system is not going to be perceiving this so much as a threat, but as actually an enjoyable experience. You'll enjoy it more, and you won't be as fatigued. So you can go and do it the next day as well if you wanted to, because you enjoyed it. And it's an opportunity to take time out away from the stresses and everything else that's going on in life, and just have a bit of connection time with yourself. Do it outside, please, rather than on a treadmill, because then you get to experience a little bit of nature as well. And that's sort of combining two things that are so simple and so accessible for everyone and free, breathing, and running being the other thing, you know.
Yeah,
That's what I do
I'd
love about
like to get into your journey to kind of unlocking like really efficient things with running and breathing through your nose, which I think is quite rare. I think that going
Well,
back
hopefully it'll
to
be normal. It should be normal.
hopefully, well, that's what the mission is. So it's interesting. I think it's easier to have more awareness of someone else's breathing than your own. So starting there, partners, friends, family members, I think we know when someone's snoring. Like, I think
Because yeah,
that's,
exactly.
yeah, like
You can hear
breathing through,
someone.
it's, you know, it doesn't, it's not conducive to you sleeping. So generally that's why. So I think mouth breathing from that point of view, like snoring is normalized. Like no one questions it. And it's like, just, you know, just, of course they might say, just stop doing it, but it's not like, oh, that's an indication that you might have poor breathing.
Yeah, that was
Like,
the
let's
same as
look at
me.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
was a snorer for sure.
I think my dad's been snoring for 40, 50, well, as long as I've known him. And I'd not once until I started learning more about breathing and functional breathing that I thought, oh, that might be a sign that other things are happening, or you experiencing too much stress throughout the day, or what poor diets, whatever it is. These are signs. So if we could just dispel some myths around like mouth breathing and perhaps as I said, friends, partners, if we notice someone's mouth breathing, like what are some of the things that we can look into, you know, with that person, or even just explore. And it feeds into the whole conversation, of course. But I think getting people, because mouth breathing, I mean, I catch myself doing it, and it depends what's happening with me or what I've eaten. There are certain factors that contribute to it. I guess the question is, like, how can we mitigate that and return to a more, you know, relaxed, because we'll talk about the benefits of nasal breathing. I think they're yeah, it didn't take long for people to understand them. But mouth breathing, yeah, it's what is it a sign of, and how can we kind of look at that a bit more to find out some things that might be going on a bit more rooted in why?
No, that's a really good question. And this, I'm speaking from a place of when the first time I tried to do nasal breathing and run, I made it about 50 meters to the end of my road before there was just like snot pouring down into my mouth. And it was just like, I couldn't do it. Like, it was just like, this is just almost like, this is not for me. But
And
very quickly,
what were you doing before that when you didn't try and nasal breathe? Were you running long distance, like
no,
5Ks?
I would run, I was doing like a park run.
Yeah.
So a 5K park run each week. My training for park run was nothing other than just turning up to park run, get out the car at 1 minute to 9, get to the start line, and then go. No one, just completely just get out and just do that. And there was, from 1 week to I don't even know why I expected to get any better. And there I'd made some improvements anyway by just doing it once a week, but there wasn't any running in the week building up to it. It was just that was the thing that we would try and do some weeks with Mr. Jacko. So yeah, it comes from a place where if you find it difficult to breathe for your nose, I know exactly what that is like, but do try to, hopefully we'll do a job on explaining why we should be trying to breathe for nose, and the benefits of it, and then obviously like the downsides of mouth breathing, both from a performance perspective, as well as when you're exercising, as well as just like a health perspective of it not being good for us for a number of different reasons. And yeah, and so now I'm at a point where, and I find this question fascinating. Like, so 2 weekends ago, I did a 40 miler, and people go, and you did all of that breathing through your nose. And because now it's a bit adapted to, I've got back to a place where I'm breathing normally. Your normal breathing should be through the nose. When you're running 40 miles, you're not running fast, you're running very slow. And the really steep hills, you're walking like it's not, but because you're not working at a very high intensity, it's even more of a reason why it should be nasal breathing, because it's not difficult. in that once you've got used to it and got adapted to it, and your nose starts to clear up because you've been using it, it's a use it or lose it organ. And I turn and I say, well, it would be far harder for me to do it mouth breathing, because then I'd get all the inefficiencies of mouth breathing going in, and my recovery would be, and I'd get more fatigued, and it would just be more stress, and I'd take more breaths. It'd be harder work to do the whole thing mouth breathing. But that can seem a little bit like, I can't get my head around how you're managing to do that. But it just is the body readapting to how it originally is supposed to breathe. So I just wanted to frame that a little bit. So like the downsides of mouth breathing, or even before that, like to illustrate, I explain this, I try to explain it simply to like illustrating a point of going like, when someone's really stressed, what does their breathing look like? Like, you know, and that could not be even from physical exercise. That might be they're really stressed because like something just crazy has happened emotionally for them. And so what was all that? It was mouth, and the mouth was wide. It was fast. It was noisy, and it was shallow, as in like it was just like the top of the chest, and it was all moving vertically. And all of that is part of our stress response. Like, so people have come across typically like the fight or flight response, and that's the sort of fancy science name for that's like the sympathetic arm of the nervous system. And that fight or flight response is there for us to get away from danger, but there might not actually really be any danger there anymore for us. And because there are all those traits of like mouth, shallow, vertical, and fast, noisy, are all linked together. So like the mouth provides very little resistance to our breathing. The nose provides 50% more resistance, simply because those holes are much smaller than a gaping hole in the middle of your face, your mouth. And when there isn't much resistance, it then can be fast. And when it's fast, it's noisy. It's the speed that creates turbulence, that creates the noise. And that's why like snoring isn't good for you, because snoring is noisy. When you're making a lot of noise, you must be breathing fast and aggressive for it to be noisy. So that's not calming for your body when you're trying to be asleep. And then because it's fast, it has to be shallow and vertical, because to breathe really fast with your diaphragm low down and expanding 3-dimensional like we're supposed to is really difficult. You try and like breathe into there really fast. It's very hard to do. And so the brain will always, go down the path of least resistance, meaning that just because it's what your body goes to as an automatic habit doesn't mean it's optimal. Your body's just going for the path of least resistance. So as soon as we start opening that mouth, and that's the way it's going to go, it then starts to become really inefficient in terms of where you're breathing into. So you're not getting air to the bottom portion of the lungs, where the greatest density of alveoli is, and blood within your lungs because of gravity. So it affects the transfer of oxygen from your lungs into your blood. It's not efficient in terms of wasting air in dead space. So there's space within your lungs that can't be occupied by air with every breath that you take. It's about 150 milliliters per person, depending on the size of them. But all that like explaining that simply is going like, well, just the number of breaths you take, you're wasting more and more air in dead space. You also, when you're breathing shallowly, you're not breathing into that bottom portion. And so therefore you have to stay in that cycle, because you're not being efficient with delivering that oxygen. The speed of the breathing also means that on the exhalations, you're getting rid of more carbon dioxide than is necessary for efficient breathing. That carbon dioxide helps with a number of things. It helps with circulation. It helps with oxygen being released from red blood cells. It's the catalyst that allows red blood cells to release oxygen. So when you get rid of it all, oxygen stays more tightly bound into the blood, but you're also sending oxygen like high up and not low down. So you're like getting in, and you're doing too many breaths. So at 3 different angles, your breathing's become more and more inefficient. And it can be, hopefully it's simple to understand that the more inefficient I'm being, the more breaths I have to take. And then it's like, how do I actually then change this cycle? And what are the things that we're looking out for? Noise. So if someone's breathing and you can hear it, even if it's through the nose and you can hear it, it must be aggressive. It's like a sign of over breathing. So our breathing generally wants to be quiet, if not silent at rest. So sound, visually, what can you see? If I can see at rest, I shouldn't, like, if you look at me now, like I'm breathing, I'm not dead. You can't see it happening. Yeah, because I'm the demand. I'm sat here doing this podcast. Like the demand for oxygen and the amount of CO2 my body's making is super comfortable. So my breathing can be calm and gentle, and almost you can't even see it. So if you start to see someone's breath, if they're exercising, well, yeah, you're going to see it. You're supposed to see it because the demand is higher. But at rest, if you can see someone's chest moving, like it's just a sign that they're being inefficient with their breathing. And then if the mouth is open, it's a sign that the body isn't happy breathing the way it's designed to with the nose, which could, like the whole chicken and egg thing of like the whole reasons why there could be a number of different factors on that. But the important bit to note with the mouth breathing is linked to that stress response of that fight or flight. So the more you stay in the habit of mouth breathing and breathing faster, breathing shallower, you're sending sort of signals to the brain that this is potentially a stressful situational environment that I'm in. And that's when we then get stuck in a little bit too much sympathetic dominance, a bit too much stress. And then the body adapts to that, and it sort of gets used to being there, and it finds it much harder to slow down and switch off and actually get into a state of parasympathetic activity. That's the rest, digest, relaxation, where a lot of the rebuilding takes place, the state that we want to be in, definitely when we're asleep, so that we can go through that beautiful recovery process each day of that sleep provides us, so that we can wake up the next day actually feeling like we're ready to go again, rather than still having a hangover from the stresses of the day before, because we're still at a physiological level just stuck in that little bit of sympathetic dominance. And we can try to reverse all of those different things. I just explain it's in the way of going like, so rather than mouth, you can say it kindly, but shut the mouth, like shut your mouth. So by having
shut your mouth, change your life. I think that's the book,
there you go. Put that on a t-shirt. But if the mouth is closed, then you're gonna have to breathe through the nose. And don't worry, you're not going to die just because you close the mouth. Even if your nose doesn't feel like great to work with, like the more you use it, the more it will start to clear up. And there's there's little breath holding drills and things you can do to help clear the nose. But there's a number of different things, functions of the nose, 30 different functions that we've found out so far. I say we.
You're one of them.
I haven't found them out. But it's what I go back to all this stuff and go like, well, we used to think the world was flat. So all history tells me.
Some still do.
Yeah, I know. But it's just one example. I need to think of another example where, but history shows us, or shows me.
We used to think you couldn't pass diseases on with your hands, for example. That wasn't a thing.
History shows us that whatever we know now, it actually isn't the whole picture or the whole story. We might be slightly right or slightly wrong or completely wrong. So there's 30 different functions of the nose that we currently know. There'll be tons of other ones more that we'll find out, I'm sure. But one of that, it provides resistance. That's going to help to slow down the breathing. When we are able to slow down the breathing, so there's resistance. That resistance gives the diaphragm something to pull against. So that then allows us to stop breathing a little bit more up here and breathe a little bit lower down, which then helps with that oxygen uptake. And then it's already being a little bit slower. It needs to be slower in order to breathe with the diaphragm and have rib cage expansion low down. It has to be a bit of a slower breath. So it's almost like creating the conditions for you to then breathe in a way that is more efficient and is more natural. I believe that the body knows how to breathe beautifully well. We just have to take away some of the restrictions that have been created for us or by us, and create the conditions to allow your body to show you how efficient it can do. And When we do breathing sessions with people in a just literally in a few minutes, we are able to make some big changes on someone's like respiratory rate by doing a little bit of work on the mechanics, and then a little bit of work on retraining the sort of habits of our breathing and our sensitivity to carbon dioxide, which is the thing that modulates our breathing. So if we can breathe slower, we'll be breathing quieter. So rather than being loud, we're trying to be quiet. Rather than being the mouth, we're trying to be the nose. Rather than vertical, we're trying to be more horizontal. And rather than high up, we're trying to be low down. So you can just think about, everyone knows that like the extreme, everyone knows that is like someone that's either like really out of breath from exercise, and it doesn't look good. You don't look like you're like killing your exercise when you're doing that. You look like you're at your limit. So we know it's like a sign of that. And then if someone's breathing like that and they're not exercising, we know that there's a problem. They are stressed, or there is a significant problem going on. So if you take it to the extreme, we know that picture of breathing isn't good. And it's actually there where I start with people to go, well, it doesn't have to be as extreme as that for it to be detrimental, but equally take what you intuitively understand about that extreme scenario, and just think logically about reversing those things for yourself.
I think one of the most common things that people still believe is that taking a big inhale, which you can feel like you're getting more in with your mouth because it's a bigger hole quickly, perhaps, that you are getting more oxygen and that is helping you recover more. Which, can we just dispel that myth?
So there's a couple of different levels to this. One would be, let's just take that, you carry on with that panting breathing. So if someone's like, it's inefficient, it's part of that stress response, and people can, if they're watching this, rather than, or even if you're listening to this, you will be able to see it, and you can see that. Now, if you see someone that's like a bit like about to have a panic attack, and you say to them like, take a deep breath, or that type of scenario or advice, and what would someone take a deep breath, and they go now, what's the difference between and the only thing that's
slower?
Yeah, exactly. The only thing that's different is the speed. So me taking a deep breath, or me hearing those words and doing what I think is a deep breath is still a mouth loud, vertical, upper chest breath. Depth is talking about where we're getting it into. The only thing that is I've slowed it down slightly, which is slowing it down slightly is obviously like beneficial, but it's only one of those dimensions we're changing. It's still a triggering stress response type of breath. If you take the exercise now and you're trying to recover your breathing faster, taking a larger breath but a slower breath is a great strategy for not wasting as much air in dead space. But importantly, the bigger breath needs to be mechanically correct in order for it to actually be a bigger breath. Meaning that if I breathe into the top portion of my upper chest here, I can't then breathe into the lower portion. I can do a bigger like upper chest breath, but I'm still not breathing air into the lower portion. Whereas if I breathe into the, and even if I do it with my mouth and breathe into here, then afterwards I can feel higher up as well. I mean, it's easier for me to do that through the nose, but then we're just something that I'm helping people a little bit more with now is not wanting to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but just because I've opened it up, that just because you breathe with your mouth during exercise, you can still do it more efficiently. You can still do it with the diaphragm, but you need to practice that. You can use your mouth a bit more like a nose and create some resistance with your mouth rather than being that big gaping hole. But
I think we're in the rabbit hole.
If you breathe into the top, you can't then afterwards, the second part of that breath, breathe in lower down. To take a deep and bigger breath, and get air in to fill the lungs in its entirety, it needs to start at the bottom.
And if it doesn't make sense, this is recorded, so just re-listen.
or,
A few times, because
or
it
I need
takes
to
a few
explain it
times
better.
to.
Yeah, but like essentially, at rest, we want to be breathing into the lower portion of the
Mhm,
lungs, but it isn't. We don't need to fill the rest of it up because the
mhm.
demand for oxygen is not higher at rest. And as
Yeah.
exercise starts to increase, or the demand starts to for oxygen increases, and the amount of CO2 that we're creating that we have to get rid of as well increases, then the breath is going to gradually need to get bigger.
Mhm,
But we want to be able to stay in control of it rather than our breath controlling us. And it always wants to start with the diaphragm pulling down, the lower ribs moving out. That's drawing air into the bottom portion of the lungs. Draw air in
mhm,
first to there, and then you can fill further up afterwards as the metabolic demands of the thing you're doing require. What we don't want to be doing is breathing more air than we need to for our metabolic demands. That's the definition of like overbreathing, of hyperventilation. That
uh,
then means you get that cascade of inefficiency, particularly blowing off too much carbon dioxide, which means your circulation restricts, and then your oxygen stays within the blood, and then you're into that cascade of then feeling like you need to breathe more, so then you're then breathing faster again. You stay in that cycle. You could very simply test that scenario of putting a pulse oximeter on, which shows your blood oxygen saturation. You can buy them for like 20 quid on Amazon, and um, you will already be at like 98 or 99% blood oxygen saturation. So when you take that like bigger breath, it's not going to do anything because you're already there. You don't want 100% blood oxygen saturation, because that would mean none of the oxygen is leaving your blood. Like the aim is not to get to 100, but between 95 and 99 is normal.
mhm. Yeah. Okay. Changing gears slightly into, because I wanted to ask you about running. Now, I've been
Yeah.
really actively slowing my paces down, doing just 5Ks every other day, concentrating on nasal breathing. And 2 years later, and it's not been consistent, of course, but 2 years later, I'm still feeling like I am where I started. And I'm committed. I'm there. But what tips would you even say for me, or someone that's, you know, knows the benefits, is passionate to pursue and continue nasal breathing, wants to go more long distances eventually, wants to maximize their VO2 and gain all the benefits of breathing nasally whilst running, but it's just really not making the milestones, kind of, so to speak, and just, is it a consistency? Is it like you need to be doing it a lot more regularly if you're not seeing much benefit, or like increase in distance, or even
Yeah.
how hard it takes going up hills and things like that, if you're not seeing
Um,
improvement?
yeah. So some mistakes I've made along the way are trying to force it and um, make it a stressful experience of like, right,
Like
I'm not
taping your
opening my
mouth.
mouth. I never tape to my mouth, but like just choosing to
Yeah.
keep it closed, like, but I'm not opening my mouth no matter what, and then going up this, and I'm not slowing down no matter what, or going up this
Yeah.
hill and just went, and like your nose
Mm.
like closing in on itself, and you're like, oh god, I can better, and just making it like too hard. That would be like putting too much weight on a bar and trying to squat something that you can't squat, and thinking that that's going to help you get stronger and move better, which it isn't. So it's not, it's, if it's too challenging, too demanding, too stressful, like we need to bring things back. So it sounds like you said at the beginning, going like, and not everyone will do this, and I didn't at the start, of going, bring your pace back to a
Hmm.
point where you can manage the airflow comfortably in and out of the nose, whatever that pace may be. And it might be a hell
Mm.
of a lot slower than you want to be, but understanding
Yeah, it might be
what is,
walking.
yeah, well, understanding what is the purpose of this for you. Why do you want to do this? And if it isn't, if it is for improving your breathing, if it is for connecting better to my breath and to me, and enjoying exercise as an experience rather than to get a time, then it's okay to slow down. Like when I did my first marathon last year, I had only two goals. One was I didn't want to walk, and the other was I wanted to enjoy it. There was no time frame I put on it, because I had, so it changes your expectations of it. And I'm someone that's very, very competitive. So that was quite freeing to just make that commitment. I also come at this from a point of, I mentioned before, my training for my 5K park run started off with like, and this was going on for a few years, where we just used to do a park run not even every Saturday. So it was like, when we could, we would do one, but there was no training during the week for it. And I did my first marathon in October last year. I'm doing the Ring of Fire, with the Ring of Fire ultra marathon, which is around Anglesey Coastal Path in Wales. So Anglesey is a little island off in North Wales. It's 135 miles in 3 days. So it's about 200k. Like, it's a lot. And I did a 40 miler in Exmoor off road, in the abyss of Exmoor. That was mental. And my training, and you could argue that probably I'm not doing enough, but my training is, again, it's not based on times, it's based on that experience, it's based on trying to be more efficient, it's based on trying to my mantra for a run is finish it and feel like you could do it all again. Whether you ran 5k, 10k, 15, 20, 40k, like finishing it and not being dead.
Because as Dave Goggins has alluded to, we can break our feet and continue. Like, that's in us. Like, we can just smash our bodies. Anyone could go out probably tomorrow and run a marathon. Anybody.
Yes, but you'd be broken.
You'd be broken. And it's like, how much are you willing to wreck your body? Because you see that in a lot of...
but that I differ very differently on that, in that I am not trying to wreck my body at all.
No, exactly.
I'm trying to finish in a state where I feel so good I could do it again, because I need to be able to do that. And it's
that's healthier, isn't it? It's a healthier approach.
Exactly. Right? I've got no interest in breaking myself. The challenge will be mentally. The challenge will be
monotony,
not feeling like you can do it mentally, and trying to find that. So at the moment, I'm probably still only really running like twice a week. And people will be like, well, you speak to someone that's trains for ultra marathons. I'm not following a training program. I'm using my own, I'm using myself as an experiment, if you like. So I'm not following any plan or program. And speaking to someone at the weekend, that last event that I did, that's like done a lot of very, very experienced ultra marathon run, and clearly from their experience, I'm not doing enough miles. But Brian Mckenzie in America, he's very big in the, very well respected in the breathwork world, and done a lot of ultra endurance stuff. Heard him talking about a 100-miler that I think he did actually very well. I feel like he came like 8th or something. He did like in a crazy 100-miler in America, where in his training he said he never ran more than 10 miles, because more than that, your body is just starting to break down. And he did a lot of work on like more strengthening work, because the stronger you are, the more muscle tissue you've got more resilience to tissue breakdown. So ultra marathons is more about who can not break down the most compared to who necessarily. Obviously, you need that base level of aerobic fitness, but you don't need I mean, I've showed those 40 miles was 30 on day one and 10 on day two. And I felt better that was Saturday, Sunday. Then on Monday, having done that, I felt better on Monday than I did on the start of Sunday. By the end of Sunday, I felt better. I felt better for actually having done it. And that was the first time I've actually ran back-to-back days. I've never done that before, and I didn't know whether I'd actually be able to do it. Because even though my mantra is, as I described, like, you go and run 30 miles in Exmoor, it took 7 hours. It's a significant amount of work that the body's done, and you feel pretty stiff no matter how you're trying to manage yourself. But that's me trying to frame for you, or frame for people listening, that it's not like you have to just do more and more and more and more. And the proof will be in the pudding 4th of September. The 2nd to the 4th of September is the Ring of Fire challenge, and whether I make it to day 3 or not will then be, I'll either be eating humble pie or the mantra will have played its way out. But the things that people can, as well as, so what things can we do in terms of, we talked about slowing the pace down. Tune in to your breath when you're actually running, and that's like feel what is going on in your trunk, in your torso. Where are you breathing into? What are your mechanics like when you're running? So tune into that side of it, the mechanics, but then tune into then the cadence of it. So that will be the speed at which you're breathing and the sound that your breath is making. So I want you to feel it, but physically, but then want us to hear it as well, or tune into that, and combine those two things as a way to help you to improve the efficiency of your breathing. If you can get your rib cage moving better, drawing air in with the diaphragm when you're running, you're going to be getting air into the lower portions that we said is more of the lungs, which is more beneficial, more efficient. If you can work on trying to extend the breath so it's a little bit slower, just a little bit, it's going to help you improve your keeping it, the slower the breath, a little bit more carbon dioxide staying in the system. That will help with your oxygen delivery, but at first it feels harder because of your sensitivity to carbon dioxide building up in the body. So working on that as you're running by slowing down the breath, working with good mechanics, will help to train that. If you just purely try to breathe through your nose and that's it, and do nothing else, you're, depending on what your habits is like before, you might be still in a fast cadence, so breathing quite fast. You might be still breathing, even though it's through the nose, still breathing up here and quite aggressive. And yes, the where it's coming into you're addressing, but you're not addressing anything else below that. Then yeah, you're probably going to stay stuck in that sort of plateau of going like, nasal breathing is pretty hard because you're like just sucking everything in and out from here, and you're not utilizing the benefits of breathing as a whole and what we understand around the physiology of breathing as a whole. Nasal breathing is one huge element of that, but you're only looking at one dimension or one aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I definitely had that at the start, and it was just like,
yeah. No, I think the different dimensions of it, tuning into those things and understanding that side of it is a great takeaway, for sure. I know you've got many other podcasts and you've done a lot of interviews, so I think if people want to, yeah, and also you got a lot online and your Instagram's very active, so yeah, I think if people want to head there to find out more of the journey and educate themselves on the breathing side of things, I think it's, yeah, there's a lot out there for people, for sure.
Yeah, we could we could
well, that's the thing,
talk all day about. That's the thing.
Of course, like it goes into, it feeds into everything,
yeah,
everything that is so yeah, important, like, and also just everything we do. We could talk about so many different hobbies, passions people have, how people do them, and there's so many different sides of it. I mean, I had Dan Brule on maybe a year and a half ago, and it's like the spiritual side of breathing, tapping into that as well. It's phenomenal.
We've only scratched the surface. That's sort of what happens. You feel like you've only just scratched the surface, but
well,
thanks for having me on.
No, it's been good, man.
Having the chance to just share a little bit of what I've learned along the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if people want to check out any stuff, then connect. I'd love to hear what people think. Like Instagram, like you said, Instagram is a fairly good place to to connect.
The Rooted Life, is that something that you're building as a is it with Owen?
Yeah, but so there's a little team of us that work together on Rooted Life. Yeah, Owen is a movement cold water breath guy as well. Lizzie York is a yoga instructor. There's Mrs. Jacko is a functional health coach, and a lot of the stuff, there's a lot of free resources on there to help you with like overall health and well-being, and we do some connection experiences where you can come for a day of various different ways to connect to yourself, nature, and others. There are sort of like 3 pillars of connection. And then probreathwork.com is the app that I've got where,
yes, I did check that out.
Yeah, the app is about, there's a free foundations course to give you all the basics to get to understand. People want to take a bit of a deep dive into some of the other stuff. There's stuff on there for that, but for most people, as I've mentioned before at the start, like breathing's for, I believe, is for everyone, because if you're not doing it, then you're dead. But there's I feel like the basics should be available to everybody, and the basics for the vast majority, just getting those foundations of like the mechanics and the cadence and the biochemistry, and getting those things, just an understanding of those and an awareness, and just a little bit of like practicing your normal day-to-day sort of like living space and routines. That's what that foundations course walks you through. And I feel there's a bit of an obligation, because it is such a fundamental thing that we have to do, that should be something that's available for people for free. That you can download. That's available on Apple and on Android. Pro Breathwork.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I downloaded it last night. Nice, man. It looks very clean, and all the stuff you're doing is super inspiring. I gotta say, it's you're doing a lot as well. I don't know. It just feels that way. I mean,
maybe that's the illusion, isn't it? Yeah, no, I've
all these sponsored posts.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just because that's what if you like something, you'll get more of it. That's the way things work these days.
Yeah. I'm just trying to just authentically share some stuff that has benefited me, and then seeing how it benefits others. Of just making stuff available for those that want to engage in that. That it's there to be able to be made normal and to be able to be understood.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, yeah, appreciate your time, and yeah, it's been good to chat. Look forward to when we can connect in person. It'd be nice.
No worries, man.
All right, man.
Cheers.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for listening all the way to the finish line. Appreciate you being here. Hit that subscribe button, share with anyone that you know will find this useful too. Thank you, and I'll speak to you soon.